Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these little guys right here. Both of these are different models of one knife, the Lionsteel Roundhead, which is a collaboration between Lionsteel and Collector Knives, hence the CK right there. This is a really interesting knife, and I want to thank very much my buddy Bill for loaning one of these guys along. Well, actually, two of them, which was really kind of him, so thank you very much for that, Bill. Next thing, let's do a size comparison real quick. Right here it is against your Spyderco Delica. So you can see here that in terms of blade length, these are actually not short knives. We're in the same ballpark as the Delica, especially considering you've got the blade guard in there. Right here against your Ontario Rat number 1. I'm sorry, the Rat 2. Of course, maybe and me. Let's see here. The Klotzli Knives ACC01. That's a really obscure knife to use for a size comparison. I have no idea why I just threw that in there. Let's see here. Steel Wheel Cut Jack 3-inch model. So, actually, I should... Yeah, I'm just going to pick random knives and do size comparisons against them. Anyways, guys, moving along. It's been a long day. So anyways, that's the size of these guys. But you can see the blade length on these guys is about 3 inches overall. Next thing, these were from a limited run with Lionsteel and whatnot, but there is going to be another drop of these soon, including a new blade shape. This is a, they call it a Euro Barlow head on it, but they're also going to offer a clip point version, which is going to be interesting as well. And like I said, this is a collaboration between Lionsteel and Collector Knives, which is fine and interesting, and I appreciate Collector Knives making this happen, because no one else had yet, so that's kind of neat. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of these interesting little knives here. Okay, so first off, on the good side, this screw-based construction, although I showed in the disassembly video, doesn't actually allow you to fully disassemble the knife. What it does make is very, very easy scale swaps. It would not be hard at all for me to swap this knife into having the ram and vice versa, to do flip-flops and things like that. And given that they have lots of scale materials that are available and being made for these, I really, really like to see this become a thing, where you can buy the scale material slabs, basically, individually, and maybe get, different slabs up here and swap those around. I think that would make this interesting and compelling, and would give this an advantage over other traditional knives where they're more traditional. You can't do that. So if they're going to have these screws on here, I think they should take advantage of that and offer the different scale materials. And the possibility of that happening in the future, to me at least, is very good. So I like that. Next thing, the dual nail nicks on this guy is actually nice. What you can see here is that the nail nick is present both on this side and symmetrically on the other side. What this means is that for people like me who hate nail nicks, this makes it very easy to pinch this knife open because you have texture coming from both sides. You have the nail nick on the other side. So even though there's not like an easy open notch or something like that ground in there, it makes it very nice to grab. And so I love the fact that they've paired the nail nicks on there. So it works nicely there. Next thing, I gotta say the engraving on the blade is very, very nice. See if we can kind of zoom in and show you that. But it's got this nice deep black to it. I mean, they've done a really nice job engraving that little section there, as well as the font. And this is that's a beautiful little bit of billboarding, and I think that's frankly the way to do it on a knife like this. It's very classy looking. It's very minimal, and it's great. So nicely done there. Next thing, the blade on this guy is very nice. It has a great steel. M390, Bowler M390, is chemically about the same as 20CV or CTS 204P. But it is at the top of the steel game right now, more or less. I mean, there are always trade-offs and whatnot, but this is one of the very best steels available right now in terms of modern knife making. And so seeing that on a little traditional knife is just spectacular. I freaking love that. But couple that with the fact that this is a nice blade shape. I do love myself a good spear point, especially in a traditional knife. I feel like that works out very nicely. You have a very nice swedge on the back of it, which, just adds a little bit of visual intrigue to it. 100%. You have a very nice sharpening choil in here, which works pretty effectively. I mean, little tiny cutout, but you can see they capture the entirety of the plunge grind area. And you've got the little blade guard on here, which is actually nice, because this means that even though this is a slip joint knife, it is completely non-locking. Even if for some reason something does press on the back side of it there, with this blade guard, all that's going to mean is that it's going to compress against your finger there. In theory, if your finger slips back, it could kind of close down on your hand, but the thing is that gives you a margin of safety that's not often there on traditional knives, and so I appreciate that very well. Actually, no, that's not true. They put things like that in, but with that little protrusion, I think it makes it a little more apparent. So I love the blade on this. I think this is a great little blade, and I love seeing this kind of high-end steel in a traditional package. Next thing, the slip joint action on this is actually pretty decent too, given I'm not a slip joint guy, and so for a true connoisseur of the slip joint world, this could absolutely be, maybe they have different opinions, but for me at least, this has a very nice, satisfying half stop that is actually sprung in both directions, which is nice, and then it has a nice spring tension even to close it. So even a fair amount of tension is going to just spring back to normal, and just using this, I don't feel like it's too light in terms of the spring to safely to use. So I like the slip joint action here. I think it's very nice. The half stop is great. They've done a good job with that too. So at least to me, all of that is the good, is that this has a nice slip joint action. It's got a very nice blade with the blade guard, with this the spear point, the great steel. The engraving is very classy. The dual nail necks are very nice. The screw-based construction makes for very easy scale swaps. That's something I hope they take advantage of in the future. And so, at least to me, like I said, that's the good. Let's talk about what's great here. Okay. To me, what's great about these guys is that they have made a modern traditional knife here. I love that to start with. That's a great idea. But I love even more so the fact that they've stuck more towards the traditional end of things. There are lots of modern traditional knives out there. Things like your Spyderco Rhodey. Things like your Hinderer slip joint, which is very much a slip joint, but also very much a Hinderer. Or even things like the Benchmade Propo, which is using modern materials to make something that is a little bit more old school. But this guy, particularly in the ram's horn, this feels like something Grandpa would have carried. I mean, sure, it's a little bit out of place when you look closely. Like the screws didn't often show up on more traditional old school sorts of knives. Or similarly, the, it's modern for sure, but it has that same reassuring kind of, oh yeah, Grandpa could have carried this effect. And that's not only cool in the emotional, for the knife person sense, but also in the people around you sense. There are plenty of people who would be very, very terrified of something like this pulled out of your pocket, but who wouldn't bat an eye at something like this. And that's kind of something to keep in mind. And so, to me, at least, what's great about these guys is that Lionsteel has modernized the traditional knife, but they've done it in a way that I feel like is very faithful to the traditional side, even when they're using these modern materials. It's kind of an amorphous thing to think is great, but I really do feel like that's the case, and that's something I've not seen out of any of these other, modernized slip joint sort of things. So, anyways, yeah, there you go. That's what's great, at least to me. Let's talk about what's bad. Okay, so on the bad side, some nitpicks and two substantial issues. First off, nitpick-wise, fit and finish is not incredible here. For instance, you get things like backspacer gaps. If you look through this at a light source, you definitely see little gaps on either side of the back spring here. Not a big deal, but it is kind of a deal. Next thing, I've noticed that, for instance, the fit and finish, if we look at the very edge of the Rams version here, you can see that there is a pretty deep gash. Well, not gash so much, but it's just rounded off way more than the bolster is here. So there's this sharp edge on the bolster. It's not a big deal, but it is absolutely kind of a deal, and it's not something I love seeing, particularly as we get into these higher price points. Given traditional knives don't tend to have the same kind of finicky fit and finish that I look for in modern knives, but it's still something I'd like to see move into that domain as we modernize things. Next thing, I'm not in love with the rounded backspacer either. This is very much personal, but the thing is, it just looks a little bit weird. You've got this little area that'll catch stuff, and compared to something like this, where it is a very nice, smooth surface here, especially with the contrasting metals, it's not as clean, it's not as interesting to me as this little surface back here, and given that it is a pin construction, heck, might as well just go for it and have this be a nice, smooth surface. Not a big deal, but it's a deal. Next nitpick is that a lot of people aren't going to love the blade spine kind of sticking up when it's closed like this. That means it's going to snag on things in your pocket, and at least for me, I definitely wanted to carry this guy in a little pocket slip. Means it's a little easier, it won't snag on anything, and it keeps both the contents of your pocket from injuring your knife and your knife from injuring the contents of your pocket. These are always a great idea if you're carrying something in your pocket, but with this little guy, it's maybe a little more necessary than some. Next thing on the nitpick train, the blade-to-handle ratio on this guy is not all that awesome. Practically speaking, only this much of the knife is carrying the blade, is carrying sharpened edge. All of this stuff from here back is just containing things like pivot and blade dang, finger guard, etc. It's not a big deal, but absolutely this felt a little bit bigger than I expected, and especially for the amount of blade you're getting, seems a little weirdly long. I'd kind of like to see this shortened up a little bit if they could. They may not be able to, though, I get it. Next thing, I gotta say, this is a knife that could use an easy open notch. What I mean by that is, like, this knife has one of those, where basically there's this little region here where you can put your fingers down and pull and grab, and it just makes it a little easier to grab onto that. By doing the nail nick on both sides, they make that a little less necessary, but that's such a beautiful affordance. It's such a nice thing for traditional knives when they have it, and so I kind of hope to see in the future more modern knives with that notch in there. It's just a beautiful thing. But all of those things are pretty nitpicky, let's be real here. There are two more substantial issues with this guy. First off is that the grind on this guy is actually not all that impressive. If we compare this little guy to this GEC Wall Street here, you can see that the Wall Street is super duper thin behind the edge. This is absolutely a slicing beast. And having relatively thin blade stock coupled with that really, really slicey blade means that this is just absolutely an incredible cutter, and a lot of traditionals are as a result. This guy, however, is not. I mean, the blade stock is thicker to start with, but it's also not ground all that aggressively. The edge that it comes to is very, very common for an Italian M390 knife, but it's not all that traditional. And that was a little bit of a disappointment to me. I was kind of hoping that what they had done is they'd ground a knife that was a traditional style, like a traditional, just using a more modern steel. It may be that there are edge weakness issues with your M390 here, which make that maybe not the perfect choice for something ground like a traditional. I don't know, I'm not a knife maker, but that was a little bit of a disappointment. I was hoping to see this ground like a traditional so that it would cut like a traditional, but instead it's ground more like a modern knife, and unfortunately it means it cuts a little more like one. So I'd like to see them be a little more aggressive on that grind, but I feel that way from pretty much everything Lionsteel makes, so it is what it is. The other issue that I really don't care for is the fact that although this is screwed like crazy, I mean, they have a bunch of freaking hardware on this guy, it is not actually disassemblable. Underneath all of these bazillion screws are a pair of screwed-in main plates. Pinned-in main plates. And what this means is that although you can take the bolster and the scales off, you still have a core that you cannot disassemble. You might be able to pop the blade out, but it sounds like just a quick trip to Pain Town if you do it, trying to get the blade back into the sprung. So this has a whole bunch of hardware on it for not actually being able to be fully disassembled. And so I would love to see them in a future version move to a model where the entire knife can be taken apart. With a spring, instead of using pins underneath here, they're using actual screws. I think it would make it more compelling, a little easier to maintain in the long term, although, again, it's a slip joint. Those aren't all that hard to maintain without disassembly. But still, it seems a little weird to have this many screws without interchangeable scales that you can buy and without the ability to disassemble it. Whatever, but it is what it is. So those are the bad things to me, is that it's not that disassemblable, despite having a bazillion screws in it. The grind on it is not very traditional, and unfortunately it means it's not all that impressive, and it means that although it cuts, it doesn't cut nearly as well as I'd hoped it would. It could use an easy open notch in my personal estimation, or at least give us that option. The blade-to-handle ratio is not all that great. The blade spine sticking up is going to bother some people, and there are some fit and finish issues, like backspacer gaps and little areas where the bolsters stick up and whatnot. Not a huge deal. In terms of ugly, honestly, for me at least, the disassembly thing's a little ugly, but the thing is, these are traditional. And there, the default is pinned shut. And so I can't really get too bent out of shape about it, so honestly, there's not all that much ugly here. So let's just go ahead and jump into the final conclusion. Look, final conclusion, I've already made clear that I love the idea of modernized traditionals. I think that's something we can, there is a lot to learn looking forward for the knife industry by looking back and seeing the kinds of patterns that have worked for many, many years to come. And I think this is a really compelling way that they've done that. And honestly, the knives themselves are pretty damn good too. I feel like I've talked a lot more about the idea than the knives, but they're solid. And for $125 for this guy here, which is in the carbon fiber, and then more for different handle options, I don't look at them as being that bad. I mean, in the grand scheme of value, traditional knives tend to be dictated by small drops and crazy secondary market prices, so yeah, I think that works out, and given the materials, I can't object too much. And so I think these are a really great choice if you are after something that is traditional, but maybe with a couple of modern affordances. Mind you, I'm not a slip joint guy. In some ways, I am one of the last people who should be reviewing these. But these are very, very compelling, 100%. I would still love to see them be actually disassemblable, and man, do I wish these were ground like a traditional, but at the same time, if you're looking for something like this is offering, then by God, you should pick one of these guys up. I think there is absolutely a lot of good here. It's a great gentleman's knife sort of option, and I love collecting knives for doing this. I love Lionsteel for working with him, and I really hope to see more of this kind of thing going on in the future. So there you go. I hope this has been interesting, that this review didn't go around your head as opposed to over it, although that'd be weird too. I don't even know. I'm trying here. It's Roundhead. I can't make a pun out of that. Anyways, have yourselves a good one. Bye now.